Good morning.
How are you?
Fantastic. How are you both?
Good.
Good. I'm excited for this follow-up call because I know there was a lot of questions that came in. So looking
Oh, there
forward.
are.
Yes, and
Okay.
we've been sharing the recording as well. So just so you know, so thank you for that. Because if they can't attend live, we've been sharing this stuff out. Plus, of course, it's out on Angie's YouTube channel. So just a quick hello to those of you that are watching live on EXP Family Tree. I see a few of you there. So you can always join the Zoom live if you're able. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll let people in, Ange, as they come to.
Perfect. Nikki, take it away.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone, and happy Monday. So mortgage interest rates are staying pretty stable right now with that 10-year treasury being at that 3.8 mark. Predictions are that it could go down to 3.66 this week, which would basically mean that those mortgage interest rates would drop into those 5% range for most qualified borrowers on the conventional side, which is really great news. We're starting to see that downward trend. And as we move into that September meeting, what's going to happen is that 10-year treasuries going to start to go lower and lower in anticipation of the Feds dropping that interest rate during their September 18th meeting. Like I had mentioned last week, we're still on the fence on whether that drop is going to be a quarter or a 0.5%, but all things will start to look really nice and really fun for all of us through the end of the year. Great opportunity to reach out to your clients, your past clients, talk about mortgage interest rates, talk about how they're lowering, see where they're at from a mortgage interest rate standpoint, see if you can help facilitate a refinance for them, or if they're saying, you know what, we've been in this house long enough, we might need to move. So those are great conversations to have. I actually did some conversations this weekend, into Friday and into this weekend, and really were able to start getting people thinking about what their next move is and what their next refinance might look like for them, or their next move might look like. And I got some really good responses for that. I also was reached out just arbitrarily by 4 different people saying, hey, we saw in the media that interest rates are lower. What's going on? What's happening? Can you help us understand what's actually going on here? So just being that expert, like we always talk about, and being able to say, okay, the market's, getting more favorable. How can I help? How can I help facilitate? So today I also wanted to talk about appraisals. We always talk about if there's repairs on appraisals, what happens to them, what we need to fix, what's health and safety issues. But I'm not sure a lot of people know, and this is kind of what I've been educating realtors on this past week, is that when an appraisal comes into a lender, that appraisal, just because it says it's at value and there's no needed repairs required, does not mean that that is the full story all of the time. So every appraisal will go through its own underwriting process. In other words, we take that appraisal and we send it to a qualified underwriter. They look through the report to make sure that the health and safety standards are met, regardless of whether or not that appraisal shows as is. So I've had a couple instances last week where we've had an appraisal that says, here's the value, which is sufficient, and it's showing as is. And that's not exactly the whole story. So the appraiser will sometimes take pictures of things, or they'll put things in the report that they are saying makes still the condition as is, but it doesn't meet Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac guidelines, or FHA guidelines, or even VA guidelines. Now on the VA side, if there's repairs to the property and there's things that they want fixed, the actual VA appraiser or the underwriter can ask the VA appraiser to adjust the value down or up depending on what those repairs are. So for example, if I had a client that had an appraisal come in at 330, after the appraisal went through underwriting, the actual updated adjusted value was 327. So that can happen on VA loans, just so you guys are aware. FHA, it can also happen, really less likely to happen on an FHA loan as far as value adjustment goes, but you can have an as-is appraisal on an FHA. The underwriter goes through it and says, hey, wait a sec though, hold the bus. Let's look at this picture. We have some stairs that are crooked, or we have some things that aren't meeting health and safety issues. And the underwriter can actually then call out repairs that the original appraiser didn't. So keep that stuff in mind as well. Also, even on a conventional loan, just because it says as is, a lot of things aren't required on a conventional loan, but an underwriter can also go back to on a conventional loan and say, hey, we need to fix some things. An example of this was last week. I had a client who is purchasing a home, and in the basement there was some dampness, and the water in the basement had soaked into the paneling and the paneling was bubbling and smelled of mildew. And the appraiser noted it on the report, but didn't require repairs. While Fannie Mae requires that if there's dampness or wetness in a basement, especially, that be remedied before they'll give the all clear. So even though the appraiser said it's as is and the value is sufficient, there were every lender does their appraisal underwriting a little differently. Sometimes it's done right away when the appraisal comes in the office. It'll get its own separate underwrite. And sometimes they'll wait until they're going for their clear to close to underwrite the appraisal. Always a good idea from a lender perspective for us to send that appraisal in right away so that we can get back to you as agents and make sure everything's good without giving you, information that's not exactly correct. So just some things to keep in mind when you're thinking about appraisals and asking your lenders, like, are we good on the appraisal? Did it come in? Or even asking your clients, did you get a copy of your appraisal? How does it look? Neither the client really isn't equipped to answer that. And so coming to the lender is absolutely the right thing to do, is to come to us and ask us how the appraisal is. And then if it's, also you might want to ask, has it gone through the underwriter? Has the underwriter signed off on it? Just a little tip for you guys as you kind of move into the next phase of this market.
And real quick on that, Nikki, so how long does that process take if we were to call you and it hasn't gone through the underwriter yet?
Well, it depends on underwriting turn times, but usually 24 to 48 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, so not very long at all.
Good.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Anything else on the streets or anything coming up?
Not really, no. We're just kind of trying to move things through and trying to get people excited about these interest rate drops and get this market moving again, and just really getting our businesses back up and where they need to be. So,
Perfect.
and I know you said there was some follow-up from last week.
Yep, absolutely. And I just pulled it up here. So, and I don't know if I'm guessing Taz might be watching on the live stream, because that's where she was last week. This was all about like the unemployment. So what she had asked was, don't they also not account for people unemployed 1 year plus in their numbers? Because you had said they restructured
Adjusted
the
their
numbers,
numbers.
we put them out. And then she went on to ask, because I said I'd ask about that closely, because she said also is the rate being lowered good considering inflation, lack of jobs, and consumer spending going to really change anything? I asked that, you responded, and then she followed up with, but how if consumers are being approved at 40 to 50% DTI? And I said, well, I'll ask this next week, be here, and we'll continue our conversation.
Yes. So that is actually a really good question. So if, borrowers from a DTI perspective, as far as what you can get approved for, we've always been able to approve people at 40 to 50% debt to income ratios. That hasn't changed over since probably 2008, 2009, after the Dodd-Frank legislation came in and kind of adjusted how Fannie and Freddie allow their debt to income percentages. So that part hasn't changed. People's discretionary income from a percentage of overall hasn't changed. Are things costing more? Absolutely. Will Fannie tend to make adjustments, or Freddie tend to make adjustments on their automated underwriting for certain profiles and not let them go above that 45 mark? Absolutely. We are starting to see from a Fannie perspective a little bit more restriction on the profile of the client that can go above a 45% debt to income ratio. That is really being reserved for clients with more than 3% down and higher credit scores and more of that discretionary income. So there's certain thresholds that are built into that automated underwriting on whether or not you're going to get accept above a 45% debt to income ratio from a conventional standpoint. FHA, that threshold is usually 50%. It's not to say that FHA won't approve above 50%. I've seen it go as high as almost 60%. So depending on the profile of the client, down payment, credit score, things of that nature, I've seen FHA approve above a 55, even up to a 60% debt to income ratio. Now, mind you, when I say that, that's obviously for clients who maybe going FHA because of some credit event, not necessarily because they're, have zero money left over after they make their mortgage payment. So there's all these compensating factors that we take into effect. So the danger of us continuing to lend above that 45 or 40% debt to income ratio, the Fannie and Freddie and FHA and VA even have these built-in residual requirements and reserve requirements to make sure that as the market changes and as inflation goes up and as things are costing people more, they will make small adjustments to their automated underwriting so that the liability or the danger of somebody going above that 45% is still met with compensating factors. It's a little bit different for each lender. Like, for example, VA, as long as you meet the residual income guideline based on the area of the United States that you're in, you get approval up to a 75% debt to income ratio, because theirs is more based on how much money you have left over. And they even take things into consideration like childcare expenses. So if you have on a VA loan, for example, if you have 2 children that are in daycare, we need to take that daycare expense into consideration when it comes to meeting that residual income guideline. So yes, I understand like there's this fear of approving things above 45%. However, there's all these stopgaps and all these contributing factors that Fannie and Freddie build into their systems to make sure that the liability or the chances of them defaulting is minimized.
Yeah, well, it's just such a good reminder to all of the agents out there listening. What I would do when I would meet with buyers often, and I didn't mean to do, like, I meant to do it, but I didn't in a manipulative way or a pushing way. But often when you meet with buyers, especially for the first time, they're like, oh, we're probably 9 months out, a year out if they've never gone through this process again. I said, great. Again, always a good time for us to be talking, regardless if it's a month or a year or 5 years. Let me get you connected with Nikki, and we'll just get a baseline to see where we're at and what the options are. 2 months later, they're in their home. Like, they don't know what they don't know. And this is a perfect conversation around that. There's so many things that are always changing. And that's why I'm always referring right over to Nikki, right over to a lender, because until you do that, they don't know what they don't know. And even things are changing. I mean, how fast would you say things are changing in your world, Nikki?
Oh my gosh, 2 or 3 times a day right now. And it's been that way for the last 2 years. And I don't just mean that from an interest rate standpoint. I mean that from a guideline standpoint. I mean that from like a change in employment standpoint. All these different guidelines and changes that are happening 2 to 3 times a day. I mean, we get reports of changes that are happening over, all the time. And so it's constantly a moving target. And, sometimes, like, for example, I'll have a client who will qualify Fannie but won't qualify Freddie for whatever reason, because the profile change is different, or Freddie's made some adjustments, or whatever that is. And that goes a lot with, can they go conventional? I mean, I've had a client who has a 640 credit score go conventional, but a 700 credit score can't go conventional. So it just depends on what that overall profile looks like and how they're changing that automated underwriting. And keep in mind, yes, can we push somebody to a 49.9% debt to income ratio on a conventional loan? Absolutely. But that doesn't necessarily mean we should. So part of the conversation that we have with our clients is, what is that strategy? What is your actual budget? Because you might on paper be able to afford a $4,000 payment, but that might really make you feel house poor as you're actually living in your daily life. So where is that balance? How can we find that balance with them and help them understand, like, you might be paying $2,600 in rent right now. Your mortgage payment is going to be $3,000. There's a $400 difference there before, or say, instead of saying to somebody, hey, your rent right now happens to be $1,000 because you're living, with roommates, and your mortgage payment is going to be $3,000. There's a payment shock factor that we have to discuss with that as well. So it's all a matter of balancing and making sure the client understands where their personal budget is, so that we can help put together the strategy. Because it's not just necessarily the numbers on the paper. That's not, that's only one indicator of how we can make sure that they have the right strategy for purchasing their home.
Yeah, and I love that you go into that, because especially going from a renter to home ownership, if you're not part of an association, you have, well, in Minnesota, you have snow removal, you have lawn care, you have home warranty, or just different maintenance that can pop up. So I love that you take that holistic approach and look at not only the numbers on the paper and the mortgage, it's everything else that surrounds that so many homeowners don't account for. And if you account for that, $500, you should have a slush fund of the AC goes out and it's 100 degrees outside, vice versa, furnace on, the Saturday morning. So
well,
that's
it just, it also makes room. Like, if you think about it and you say to somebody, okay, you're going to take on this $3,000 mortgage payment. what happens if we're in an inflation situation like we are now, where your discretionary spending is lower than you've ever seen it before? Are you still going to be comfortable at $3,000? We can't make predictions about employment. We can't make predictions about, how your job is going to go or what raise you're going to get, or if you're going to have the same job in a year. But we can make predictions based on past behavior on what your budget is going to look like. And what does it look like, especially right now when things are costing us so much more than they had in the last 2 years. And that's part of the reason that Fed interest rate is starting to drop is because of that inflation number and then employment numbers and those kind of meeting up and causing that push down. There was a comparison that was done between the numbers in 2019 and what that looked like from an inflation standpoint and the CPI and all these factors that the Fed gathers, and comparing 2019 to where we are at now, and basically saying that a lot of similarities from a percentage standpoint as far as inflation goes, as far as CPI numbers, everything, a lot of very similar numbers, but yet the Fed rate was drastically lower in 2019. It was like 4% versus 8.5% right now. And so the Fed's conservative approach to their interest rate and how that's affected the economy and how that's affected our discretionary spending is really what they're focusing in now and saying you guys have been too restrictive for too long. And that's why that Fed interest rate in a lot of ways is getting pressure to come down.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if we have these buyers that have been on the fence or we were working with at one point in time, who would be an ideal buyer to kind of bring back to have a fresh conversation with you?
Literally anyone that's talked to you in the last 2 years. Any phone call that you've gotten, any person that has even hinted at the idea that, hey, what are interest rates doing? What, should I even consider selling a house? Should I even consider buying a house? Literally anyone in the last 2 years who said, oh, like they backed out for whatever reason. Most of the time it's going to cost too much. I don't have enough down payment. The interest rate is too high. The reasons that they backed out or said, I want to pause. Those are the people that you really are going to be the prospects and the targets to really get in front of and say, okay, let's relook at the situation and let's relook at where the interest rates are and where they're going.
Yes, and I know so many agents that I coach and talk to, that has been the story. We're going to wait, especially earlier this year. And I think that is such a good point. Absolutely. So curious, what are you doing? Your social media or TikToks are your little quick notes on social media about this week?
So it'll be obviously based around where mortgage interest rates are going. I'll probably do some tidbits about, appraisal stuff, just kind of different things that I see. There aren't a lot of huge changes coming in from a financing standpoint, from a product standpoint, but just being able to help people facilitate and talk about refinance, talk about purchasing, talk about, what are key triggers for yourself to get in touch with a lender or a real estate agent to say, yeah, like, let's do this. I also did one, I believe it was last Thursday, on basically saying, agents, let's work together. There's some strategies that we can do together, some marketing we can do together, some phone calls, things like that we can really make together for any of your past clients that can help maybe move that needle a little bit and get them relooking at the situation. Another interesting category would be anyone who's been in their home for 5 to 7 years. The reason I say that is because, number one, if they've been in their home 5 to 7 years and they did not refinance during the 2% or 3% interest rate time frame, those clients are at 5.5%, 4.5% to 5.5%. Those clients historically stay in their home for 5 to 7 years before they either refinance or they want to move. So that's another kind of unique category that you can say, okay, we're just going to check in and see how their family's doing, seeing how they like the home, get in front of them for whatever other reason, to talk to them just on a personal level. And that might also, help stimulate just some conversation about, hey, you've been in your home for a while. I know your family's growing, or so-and-so is going off to college, or you might want to downsize, just kind of those triggering things that have happened over the past 5 to 7 years, because those clients are going to have those interest rates that are a bit inflated if they didn't refinance during the 2% time.
Yeah, absolutely. So there it is, agents, with a minute to go. Honestly, the whole mindset or the whole action step item is do a sprint. I call them sprints. So find a time each week, whether it's a half hour, maybe an hour, if hour's too long, do 45 minutes, and really shut down all other distractions and look at this. Look at your pipeline, feed your pipeline, and find 5 people a week It should be a day, but I have agents that will resist that. So just find 5 people, 10 people a week and imagine how different your business could look. I would say 5 minimum, if not more, because never cap your goals. 5 minimum a day to reach out, whether that's through social media, messaging, texting, calling, emailing, all of the above. Reach out, have some urgency and the right energy behind it. Do it for the right reasons and the energy will be felt. If you don't want to do it or if you feel icky about it, then they're going to feel that and no, your business isn't going to go anywhere. So think about this. Think about how you can help them and how you can show up as the consultant and the advocate and really looking out for their best interest and again, their real estate goals. What are their goals and how can you play a big role in getting them to achieve those? That's really what our goals are. Yeah. I love it.
Absolutely.
Yay. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm available to help with anyone that you want to strategize with or any marketing that you want to do. I have no expectation of actually, saying, oh, to send clients or whatever, but I'll do the work with you. I'm totally okay with that. I'm totally willing to help in any way that I can. It benefits you, it benefits everybody. And so that's really what matters.
I love it. Yes, that's why you're here, because you're a giver like Cari and myself. So we make a fantastic trio, and I appreciate that. And I would really encourage anyone on this phone, take Nikki up on this, strategize, figure out different ways to get back in the sphere of your sphere and figure this out because it's a huge opportunity right now. And if you're sitting on the sidelines, that's where you're going to be left.
Perfect.
Love it. Cari, anything before we go? All right. All right. We'll see you all next week. Nikki, shout out your phone number for people to get in conversation with you right away.
Sure. 952-484-1584. You can find me on socials at mortgages from MN to AZ.
Perfect. All right. Till next week, everyone. Have a good one.